The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my mother's heels clicking across the marble floor. She stood beside my wealthy older brother, dressed in pearls and confidence, while I sat alone at the defense table wearing my diner uniform beneath a cheap coat. Then she said the words that shattered me. My face burned with humiliation. I had spent years working double shifts at Rosie's diner just to survive after my family cut me off. Meanwhile, my brother Ethan inherited my late father's company without lifting a finger. But today wasn't about money. Weeks earlier, I discovered documents proving Ethan had manipulated my father during his illness. Dad never intended to leave everything to Ethan alone. He wanted the company divided equally. Now my own mother sat in court pretending I was stupid. She looked at me with disgust. You belong carrying plates, not fighting legal battles. I nearly broke right there. But then my lawyer slid a folder toward me. Inside were financial records, secret transfers, and one final letter written by my father before he died. Everything was about to change. You're right, I said quietly. I am a waitress. The courtroom smirked. Then I placed the evidence on the judge's desk. And I'm the only person in this room telling the truth. The silence afterward felt deadly. For the first time, my brother looked nervous. Every eye in the courtroom followed him. My mother crossed her arms confidently, but Ethan's face turned pale the second the judge began reading aloud. To my daughter Lily, if you are reading this, it means someone ignored my final wishes. A murmur spread across the room. My mother suddenly interrupted. That letter could be fake. But the judge wasn't finished. Attached to the letter was my father's notarized signature and the name of his private attorney, a man Ethan claimed had lost all records after Dad died. The judge's expression hardened immediately. Then came the real shock. Dad had left me something else, 30% controlling shares hidden under a private trust. My brother's confidence cracked instantly. For years, Ethan treated me like garbage while secretly stealing what belonged to me. And my mother knew the entire time. I stared at her in disbelief. She refused to meet my eyes. That hurt more than the betrayal itself. While court recessed, reporters flooded outside. Suddenly everyone wanted to interview the waitress daughter. Funny how people only listen once money appears. But they didn't know the truth. I never wanted revenge. After Dad died, my mother forced me out of the house within 2 weeks. Ethan changed the office locks and told employees I was unstable. I spent nights sleeping in my car before Rosie, the diner owner, gave me a job. Rosie saved my life. But during those years, I learned something important. Spoiled people collapse under pressure. And Ethan was already collapsing. Because once investigators reviewed the financial records, they discovered millions missing from company accounts. The fraud investigation officially began that afternoon. That night, my mother appeared outside my apartment unexpectedly. Her luxury car looked ridiculous parked beside my broken-down building. When I opened the door, she immediately looked uncomfortable. I laughed bitterly. You embarrassed yourself. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her voice softened. You need to drop this case. I stared at her in shock. Why? Tears suddenly filled her eyes. Because Ethan owed dangerous people money. My mother confessed everything. My brother had been secretly gambling for years and stealing company funds to cover his debts. She helped protect him because she feared what would happen if the truth came out. You always protected him, I whispered. She looked ashamed. Because she knew I was right. The next court hearing exploded into chaos. Investigators presented evidence of fake invoices, hidden accounts, and illegal transfers connected directly to Ethan. Then Ethan completely lost control. He pointed at me screaming, "You ruined everything." Security had to restrain him. But the worst moment came when the judge asked my mother if she knowingly hid financial crimes. She froze. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Not pride. Not superiority. Fear. Because the lies were finally collapsing when character witnesses were called, I expected executives. Instead, Rosie walked into court wearing her diner apron proudly. My mother looked horrified. Rosie calmly testified how I worked overtime for struggling coworkers, paid customers meals secretly, and helped employees escape abusive homes. She may be a waitress, Rosie said firmly, but she's the strongest woman I know. The courtroom became silent again. This time, nobody laughed. Even the judge smiled slightly. For years, my family measured worth through money. But Rosie reminded everyone what real value looked like just when the case seemed over. Dad's former attorney revealed one final piece of evidence. The screen flickered on. My father looked weak but determined. If Ethan controls this company alone, he said, he will destroy it. Then he turned toward the camera. I completely broke down crying. So did my mother. Ethan was removed from company leadership pending criminal investigation. The court restored my ownership shares fully. And my mother. She sat quietly through the entire ruling, unable to even look at me. When everything ended, reporters rushed toward me asking the same question. I thought carefully before answering. I didn't prove waitresses matter, I said. We already mattered. People just refused to see it. That quote spread everywhere online overnight. Months later, my mother visited Rosie's diner quietly. No makeup. No designer clothes. No arrogance. Just regret. She sat across from me, trembling slightly. I didn't forgive her instantly. Some wounds take longer than apologies. But for the first time, she spoke to me like I mattered. Not like just a waitress. Like her daughter. A year later, I stood inside the company headquarters as the new CEO. But I kept one thing unchanged. Because that place reminded me who I really was before money entered the picture. One evening, a young waitress nervously recognized me. Aren't you the woman from court? I smiled. Yeah. I handed her a tray gently. You stop waiting for their respect, I said. And start respecting yourself. Across the diner, Rosie smiled proudly. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt unstoppable. My first official week as CEO was brutal. Half the executives believed I didn't belong there. Some still whispered, "Waitress," behind my back like it was an insult. During a board meeting, one senior manager smirked and asked if I needed help understanding the financial reports. I recognized him immediately. He was one of Ethan's closest allies. Instead of arguing, I calmly opened the missing account files investigators recovered. Then I pointed directly at unauthorized expenses he approved himself. The room went silent. His face drained of color. I learned something serving tables, I said quietly. People reveal who they are when they think you're beneath them. By the end of the day, he resigned. For the first time, employees began looking at me differently. But as someone dangerous to underestimate. One late night, Rosie collapsed inside the diner kitchen. I rushed to the hospital terrified. The woman who saved my life now looked small and fragile in a hospital bed. Doctors explained years of stress and overwork damaged her heart badly. Rosie tried joking through the pain. Guess I can't yell at lazy cooks anymore. But I could hear the fear beneath her smile. She never told me. That night, I made a decision. I quietly paid every debt connected to Rosie's diner. But when she found out, she became furious. I didn't help you for money, Lily. Tears filled my eyes. My mother begged me to support it. He's still your brother, she cried. But Ethan never once apologized. Not for destroying Dad's wishes. Not even for treating me like garbage for years. When I visited him in jail, he laughed bitterly. I stared through the glass calmly. No, I think Dad lost both his children the day you chose greed. For a second, guilt flashed across his face. I walked away realizing something painful. Some people would rather destroy everything than admit they were wrong. One afternoon, I visited my old community college quietly. The same counselor who once encouraged me to continue school still worked there. She nearly cried when she saw me. You made it, she whispered proudly. But walking through those halls reminded me of the dreams I abandoned after my family threw me out. That pain never fully disappeared. So I created something new. The Lily Carter Scholarship Fund, designed specifically for working-class students juggling jobs while attending school. Especially restaurant workers. When the announcement went public, Thousands of people shared their own stories online about being treated as less than because of their jobs. For the first time, I realized my story wasn't only mine anymore. One rainy evening, my mother arrived at my office carrying an old photo album. Inside were childhood pictures of me my father secretly kept in his office for years. "I didn't know he saved these," she admitted softly. Then she finally confessed the truth I spent my whole life feeling. After Ethan was born sick as a child, my mother became obsessed with protecting him. Over time, she stopped seeing me as someone who also needed love. Hearing those words hurt almost worse than the insults ever did. Because deep down, part of me always hoped she would say them someday. A national talk show invited me for an interview. But Rosie convinced me. "People need to hear this story," she said. During the interview, the host asked the question everyone wanted answered. What hurt more, losing the company or your mother calling you just a waitress? I took a deep breath. The insult wasn't about my job, I answered. It was about being told my value depended on status. The clip exploded online overnight. Millions watched it. Restaurant workers, cleaners, cashiers, delivery drivers, people everywhere shared stories about being treated as invisible. Suddenly, just a waitress became a symbol of resilience instead of shame. Just when life finally stabilized, investigators uncovered one last disaster. Before his arrest, Ethan secretly attempted selling company assets illegally overseas. If the deal succeeded, hundreds of employees would have lost jobs. I confronted Ethan one final time. "You would have destroyed innocent families." "You always think you're better than me," he muttered. "No," I replied quietly. "I just learned responsibility while you learned entitlement." For once, he had no response. As Rosie recovered, she revealed something surprising. She always dreamed of opening a second diner location, but never had enough money. So I bought an empty building downtown secretly and handed her the keys. Rosie burst into tears immediately. I smiled. Weeks later, the grand opening line stretched around the block. And above the entrance, the sign proudly read, "Months later, I returned to the same courthouse for Ethan's sentencing hearing." Walking those halls again brought back every painful memory instantly. The whispers. The humiliation. As I entered, several courthouse employees recognized me and smiled respectfully. One elderly janitor even stopped me quietly. "My daughter's a waitress too," he said proudly. I nearly cried right there. Because finally I understood. Winning wasn't about the company. The exact same place she once publicly humiliated me. She looked older now. Softer somehow. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. For years, I dreamed of hearing those words. But strangely, I no longer needed them. I smiled gently anyway. Then I looked at the cameras surrounding us and spoke clearly. The crowd erupted in applause. And standing there beneath the courthouse lights, I finally realized something powerful. The girl they once mocked in a diner uniform was gone. 6 months into rebuilding the company, another crisis hit. Several warehouse employees threatened to strike after years of unfair treatment under Ethan's leadership. Previous executives wanted me to shut them down immediately. Instead, I drove to the warehouse myself. The workers looked shocked seeing the CEO arrive alone wearing simple jeans and no security team. One exhausted employee finally snapped. "You rich people never listen until we stop working." I understood that anger more than they realized. So I listened. For 4 straight hours, workers described unsafe conditions, impossible schedules, and managers who treated them like machines. By the end of the week, I approved healthcare improvements, overtime protections, and safer equipment. The board nearly exploded in protest. "You're spending too much on employees," one investor complained. I looked him directly in the eye. "No," I replied calmly. "The company spent too many years exploiting them." For the first time in company history, employees received standing ovations instead of warnings. And productivity rose higher than ever afterward. Respect changed everything. One busy Friday night at Rosie's place, an elegant older woman requested me specifically. When I approached her table, she smiled warmly. I didn't remember her at first. "You treated me like family," she whispered. Tears filled my eyes because I barely remembered doing it. To me, it had simply felt human. But to her, it changed everything. Before leaving, she handed me a business card. She was the owner of one of the country's largest hospitality foundations. Sometimes the smallest acts survive longer than the biggest victories. My mother had heard about Rosie for years, but never actually met her. One afternoon, she finally visited the diner while Rosie prepared pies in the kitchen. The tension between them felt immediate. Because Rosie represented everything my mother once looked down on. But Rosie wasn't intimidated at all. She needed love, Rosie said directly. Not perfection. My mother stood frozen. Then, unexpectedly, she began crying. I thought pushing Lily harder would make her stronger, she admitted. Rosie shook her head gently. No. Hardship made her strong. Kindness kept her alive. For once, my mother didn't argue. She simply sat there silently absorbing the truth. Almost a year after his sentencing, I received a handwritten letter from Ethan in prison. At first, I nearly threw it away. But curiosity won. He admitted he spent his entire life trying to earn Mom's approval through success and money. After Dad died, greed consumed him completely. Then came the sentence that shocked me most. You were always happier than me, even when you had nothing. I read that line repeatedly. Because maybe he was right. At my poorest, I still had people who genuinely cared about me. Ethan only had power. And power disappears fast when fear is all holding people together. A documentary filmmaker approached me about telling my story publicly. Again, I hesitated. But after speaking with restaurant workers across the country, I realized how many people carried invisible shame about their jobs. So I agreed. The documentary aired nationally 3 months later. Millions watched the courtroom footage of my mother calling me just a waitress. But what touched people most wasn't the humiliation. It was what came after. The scenes of Rosie helping struggling employees. The warehouse workers finally being respected. Messages flooded in nonstop afterward. One woman wrote, I stopped being ashamed of my uniform after hearing your story. I saved that message forever. During Rosie's birthday celebration, she finally revealed something shocking. She had once been wealthy herself. Years ago, her husband owned multiple restaurants before gambling addiction destroyed everything. After losing nearly all their money, he abandoned her completely. Rosie rebuilt her life alone from scratch. That's why I recognized your pain immediately, she told me softly. I sat there stunned. All those years, Rosie understood humiliation better than anyone. Yet, she never became bitter. She became compassionate instead. That night, I realized strength isn't surviving pain. It's surviving pain without becoming cruel afterward. Just when life finally felt peaceful, the company faced a massive financial attack from competitors trying to exploit Ethan's scandals. Stocks crashed. News channels predicted the company would collapse within months. Instead, I took a huge pay cut alongside executives and protected employee jobs. People thought I was insane. But the workers responded by working harder than ever. Departments united. Communities supported the company publicly. And slowly, the company recovered. Not because of greed. Because people finally believed they mattered. During a charity gala, reporters suddenly asked my mother about the infamous courtroom insult. The room became painfully quiet. For a moment, she looked terrified. Then she stepped toward the microphone. The greatest mistake of my life, she said shakily, was teaching my daughter that status mattered more than character. You could hear a pin drop. She turned toward me publicly. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Because real apologies don't defend themselves. They accept responsibility completely. One evening after closing, Rosie handed me an old photograph she found in storage. I stared at it in shock. Apparently, Dad secretly visited Rosie's during my shifts several times after Mom forced me out. He was proud of you, Rosie whispered, even when he didn't know how to fix the family. On the back of the photo, Dad had written one sentence. She serves people with more dignity than most executives. I completely broke down crying. Because after all these years, I finally understood he saw me clearly the entire time. 2 years after the trial, I was invited back to the courthouse for a public leadership event. Walking into that building again felt surreal. This time, nobody whispered. The same courtroom where I was humiliated now stood filled with students, workers, and young women carrying notebooks. Many wore restaurant uniforms proudly. When I stepped to the podium, I looked around slowly. Then I smiled. 2 years ago, someone tried to shame me with my job title, I began. Soft laughter spread through the room. But your job doesn't define your worth. Your character does. The audience erupted into applause. After the speech, a nervous teenage girl approached me quietly. I'm a waitress too, she admitted. Then you already know how to work harder than most people ever will. As I walked out of the courthouse beneath the evening lights, I glanced back one final time. The building no longer reminded me of humiliation. It reminded me of transformation. Because sometimes the place where you're broken becomes the exact place where the world finally sees your strength. A shy 17-year-old girl named Emma started working at Rosie's place after school. She barely spoke and flinched whenever customers raised their voices. One night, I found her crying in the storage room after a businessman mocked her for looking poor. The words hit too close to home. Then I told her about the courtroom. About the laughter. About my own mother calling me just a waitress. You, she whispered. I smiled sadly. People only see uniforms. They rarely see the person wearing them. From that night forward, Emma slowly became more confident. And I realized something powerful. Healing feels different when you help someone survive the pain you once carried alone. After early release for cooperating with investigators, Ethan returned home quietly. The media exploded instantly. Most people expected me to hate him forever. Honestly, part of me still did. But when I finally saw him again, he barely resembled the arrogant man from court. Prison stripped away his confidence completely. During dinner at my mother's house, the silence felt unbearable. Then Ethan finally spoke. I don't expect forgiveness, he admitted. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for destroying Dad's company and our family. No excuses. No manipulation. Just regret. For the first time in years, I believed him. But forgiveness isn't instant. Sometimes it begins with simply choosing not to hate anymore. One scholarship recipient named Carlos invited me to his college graduation. His parents worked 3 jobs each and still struggled financially. Yet they arrived dressed proudly, crying through the entire ceremony. After graduation, Carlos hugged me tightly. I almost dropped out twice, he confessed. Your scholarship saved me. Feeling invisible. Believing survival mattered more than dreams. That day, I doubled the scholarship fund permanently. Because education shouldn't belong only to people born lucky. Rosie shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to retire. The diner staff nearly revolted. But Rosie only laughed softly. My knees disagree. Rosie wasn't just part of the diner. She was the heart of it. One evening, I admitted my fear privately. You saved my life, I whispered. What happens when you're gone? You stop surviving because of me and start living because of yourself. Her words stayed with me long afterward. I found my mother sitting alone inside Dad's old office one rainy afternoon. She looked completely lost. I wasted so many years, she whispered while holding an old family photo. For the first time, she admitted something heartbreaking. She spent most of her life chasing appearances because she feared being judged herself. Status became her shield. Wealth became her identity. And in the process, she forgot how to love people honestly. Not as enemies. Not even fully healed family. Just 2 broken women finally telling the truth. An elderly man visited Rosie's place every Sunday morning. You probably don't remember me, he said. Then he revealed that years earlier, when I was struggling badly, I secretly paid for his breakfast after learning he couldn't afford medication and food in the same week. I barely remembered doing it. But he never forgot. Before leaving, he handed me a folded note. Inside was a simple sentence. The world survives because ordinary people choose kindness. I kept the note in my wallet afterward. Finding work after prison proved nearly impossible for Ethan. Nobody trusted him. Eventually, Rosie shocked everyone by offering him a dishwasher job temporarily. At first, Ethan looked insulted. Then reality humbled him quickly. For weeks, he scrubbed dishes silently beside teenagers and exhausted cooks who worked harder than he ever had before. I used to think these jobs were beneath me. And slowly, my brother began changing. Not through punishment. Through humility, the documentary filmmakers returned wanting a follow-up special. Former waitresses became business owners. Scholarship students graduated. Workers demanded fair treatment proudly. Watching those stories unfold overwhelmed me emotionally. Because something that started with humiliation had somehow become hope for thousands of strangers. Do you still consider yourself a waitress? I smiled immediately. Always while cleaning storage boxes, my mother discovered Dad's old watch hidden inside a drawer. He wanted you to have this someday. Engraved inside were words I'd never seen before. Dad wasn't perfect. He failed to protect me when I needed him most. But somehow, he still saw the person I would eventually become. Everything looked different now. The company survived. My family slowly healed. The shame was gone. Emma approached carrying coffee and smiled proudly in her waitress uniform. Outside, customers laughed beneath the glowing diner sign. And suddenly, I realized something beautiful. Success never came from proving rich people wrong. I looked around the diner one final time and smiled softly. Because the waitress they once mocked. One afternoon, a small girl around 8 years old walked into Rosie's place carrying a toy serving tray. Her mother apologized nervously, explaining the child loved pretending to be a waitress. Before, that kind of statement might have sounded embarrassing to some people. But not anymore. The little girl looked up at me excitedly. "My mommy says you're famous." I laughed softly. "Not famous. Just hardworking." She grinned proudly and spent the next hour helping servers carry napkins. Watching her made something inside me ache gently. Because children aren't born believing certain jobs are shameful. Before leaving, the little girl hugged me tightly and whispered, "I want to be strong like you." And honestly, that meant more than every business award combined. Rosie finally announced her official retirement date. Customers who'd known her for decades filled the restaurant on her final night. Some brought flowers. Others brought old photographs and handwritten letters thanking her for years of kindness. This place survived because people kept choosing each other during hard times. Then she looked directly at me. And Lily reminded me that dignity has nothing to do with money. I completely broke down crying. At closing time, Rosie untied her apron slowly and placed it in my hands. "Take care of them," she whispered. It felt less like retirement, and more like passing down a legacy. Months later, Ethan agreed to participate in a public business ethics seminar about fraud and accountability. The audience expected excuses. Instead, Ethan shocked everyone. Then he glanced toward me sitting quietly in the back row. My sister spent years serving strangers with more integrity than I ever showed leading a company. The room fell silent. For the first time, Ethan wasn't defending himself. He was finally accepting responsibility completely. And strangely, I felt proud of him. My mother decided to sell the enormous family mansion. The house once represented status and perfection to her. But after everything that happened, it only felt empty. As we packed old boxes together, we found childhood drawings, birthday cards, and family videos buried beneath expensive decorations and forgotten furniture. "You used to laugh so much," she whispered sadly. I looked at her quietly. "So did you." Because somewhere along the way, our family stopped being a family and started becoming an image. But after everything that happened, it only felt empty. As we packed old boxes together, we found childhood drawings, birthday cards, and family videos buried beneath expensive decorations and forgotten furniture. My mother stared at one old video of me dancing badly in the living room as a child. I looked at her quietly. "So did you." That hurt us both. And images can't love people back. Emma graduated high school at the top of her class. When she gave her graduation speech, she surprised everyone by mentioning me publicly. "There's nothing shameful about honest work," she said proudly. "A waitress taught me that." I cried harder than her parents did. After the ceremony, Emma hugged me tightly. "You believed in me before I believed in myself." Her words hit deeply because Rosie once did the exact same thing for me. And suddenly, I understood. Healing continues when people pass hope forward. One evening, a woman approached me nervously outside the diner. It took me a moment to recognize her. She had been sitting in the courtroom during my trial years earlier, one of the people who laughed when my mother called me just a waitress. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Not because public opinion changed, because life finally taught her empathy. I accepted her apology quietly. Growth sometimes arrives late. But late is still better than never. Near the company headquarters stood an old park bench my father used to sit on during lunch breaks. I decided to restore it quietly and place a small plaque there. Employees began eating lunch there regularly afterward. Some even called it Dad's Bench. And somehow, that small memorial felt more meaningful than giant statues or expensive buildings. Because Dad's greatest lesson wasn't about business. It was about humanity. A month after retirement, Rosie invited me to her small countryside home. When I arrived, I nearly cried instantly. She had framed newspaper headlines, scholarship photos, and diner memories across an entire wall. At the center hung one picture from the courtroom. Below it, Rosie placed a handwritten quote. I stared at it speechless. Rosie smiled warmly. "You changed more lives than you realize." For once, I finally believed it. For the first time in nearly 15 years, our family shared dinner peacefully. No shouting. No competition. Just honesty. Ethan washed dishes afterward automatically now, making everyone laugh. Mom cooked badly but tried anyway. And while sitting around the table together, I realized healing doesn't erase the past. It simply gives people another chance to build something healthier. But maybe perfection was never the goal. Maybe peace was enough. 2 years after Rosie retired, I stood outside a newly opened training center for low-income workers pursuing education and career opportunities, the Rosie Carter Foundation. Crowds gathered for the opening ceremony. Students, servers, janitors, single parents. People society often overlooks. As reporters asked how I wanted history to remember me, I smiled softly. Not as the woman who won in court, I answered. The applause felt endless. And standing there beneath the sunlight, surrounded by ordinary people doing extraordinary things, I finally understood the truth completely. I was never just a waitress. I was a survivor, a daughter, a teacher, and most importantly, a woman who learned her worth was never decided by anyone else. The morning of the foundation's grand opening felt different from anything I had ever experienced before. Just a waiter. Just a cleaner. Just a cashier. Just nothing important. But today, those same people were sitting in the front rows. The building itself stood tall and bright, the Rosie Carter Foundation Training Center, named after the woman who once believed in me when I had nothing left except exhaustion and broken dreams. I adjusted my simple blazer and stepped onto the stage. The crowd went silent. For a moment, I saw flashes of my past, the courtroom laughter, my mother's cold voice calling me just a waitress, Ethan's arrogance, the nights I slept in my car wondering if I would ever matter again. But none of it controlled me anymore. I took a slow breath. When I was younger, I was told my value was tied to my job title. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own stories in mine. I was told I was less because I carried plates instead of a briefcase. I paused, letting the words settle. But life taught me something my family never did. I looked across the crowd. There is no such thing as just. A wave of silence followed, deep, emotional, heavy. I continued. Every person here has carried something invisible. Pain, responsibility, survival, and still showed up. My voice softened. That is not weakness. That is power. Behind me, the foundation doors opened, revealing classrooms filled with students ready to begin new careers. People who had once been dismissed were now being trained, supported, and respected. For the first time, I saw my work as something bigger than justice. It was restoration. After the speech ended, people stood one by one. Then all at once, applause filled the entire hall. Ethan stood beside her, working quietly as part of the foundation staff now, no longer running from his past, but learning from it. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, a young waitress from the training program approached me nervously. "Are you still a waitress at heart?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "And that's exactly why I'm here." Later that night, after everyone had left, I stood alone outside the building. The city lights reflected softly on the glass walls. I thought about everything it took to get here, the humiliation, the loss, the rebuilding, the forgiveness that came slowly, painfully, and imperfectly. And I realized something simple but final. They tried to define me with one sentence.